Good evening. Welcome to the Cheese Room podcast. Nobody is going to be watching because you're all going to have your eyes on Arsenal versus Manchester City, which is fine. We've got our eyes on that too. And City doing a fine job right now of going top of the league. So long may that continue. Tonight, I'm joined by two special guests. I'm going to remove that banner, which I should have done previously, so I can see your beautiful faces. And we're going to be talking accounts. We're going to be talking quickly about the Milan game because Steve was there. He's come back via private jet. Rumour has it, Raz Air Limited flew him back. He's come back from the game, and we can talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about any potential takeover and what we think about that. And then we're going to break down the finances. And these two chaps know far more about financial accounts than me. Steve by trade is an accountant, and Jack, I'm sure you know your way around numbers.
Yeah, I'm not an accountant. But I am a financial advisor, but I deal with individuals more than I do companies.
There you go. Maybe you can take a look at my tax problems then. That would be good. If you could get me out of paying super tax, I would really enjoy that. Okay, let's kick off. Milan last night away. Steve, how was it?
Better than I expected, I won't lie. Well, the game was better than I expected. The San Siro was everything I kind of feared it would be. It's just not a good play. Like, it's iconic, and it was wonderful to go there, but it's not. And I'm sure anybody watching who went there last night or has been there previously, particularly as an away fan, the up in the gods. Security was just a pain to get in. To get in there. I didn't see any trouble, but it was continuous kind of bottlenecks and kettling just to get in, and we nearly missed to kick off. Got in about 5 minutes before going.
Is that because you were getting leathered in Milan?
A little bit,
Yeah,
but I judged it perfectly, because for anybody who doesn't know, I won't go into too much information here, but just Google San Siro away toilets. I made sure I kind of crested mid-afternoon, and then I stopped drinking because I didn't want to go to the toilet there at all.
Oh, really? That bad? Okay.
Hole in floor, basically. Literally a hole in the floor.
Oh, is it? Okay. So we'll be treating them when they return, when they have the return fixture, yeah?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? It was all saying, all us lads, or people around us is just saying that, Spurs, we give people the kind of premium treatment, normally on the pitch as well. But like, it's just shoddy. It was really poor, really poor. But iconic stadium and the game itself. I know we covered it last time show, which is awesome, by the way. I was listening to the show as I was trying to leave the stadium because we got kept in.
Bless you.
But really good. Like, I thought we actually played okay. Sarr and Skipp in midfield were really good. Spoke to some Milan fans after the game, and they were raving about Sarr as well. So I think he played like an established player, and he's not. Yeah. So credit to him.
I thought Sarr and Skipp were both. I mean, I'm the world's biggest. Like, I am the founding member of the Oliver Skipp fan club. Was there at the birth of Oliver Skipp.
And Conception.
Hey.
And Conception.
I was there, knocking
on the window. That's breaking stories here.
That's another story. I thought he just proved me right in everything I've said about him. He was balanced, controlled. When he lost the ball, he was very quick to get back in a position where he could retrieve and recycle it. And I think he's a very good player, very strong player in our midfield. I think Sarr is going to be a revelation. You imagine he's 20 years old, but he's got some experience and beefed up a little bit because, let's be fair, he looks like a kid compared to some of the other guys, albeit he's tall. I think he's a hell of a player, and he's got everything in his locker. So whereas sort of you view Skipp as your solid DM, Hojbjerg, if you like, I think Sarr has got the potential to be, as good as or better than Bentancur long term. I think he's got everything in his locker. So we're going to need it. We're going to need it because from only Spurs could go from having no injured players to having like 4 or 5 first teamers out within the space of a week. So yeah, and 1-0 gives us a chance, Jack. Do you think? Oh, it's 3-1.
3-1.
Oh, even better. There we go.
Holland. Sorry.
There's just multiple levels. I'm happy with that. Obviously, he's the captain of my Premier League dream team.
He is as well for me this week. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, he is every week for me, if I'm being really honest. I'm a bit lazy with it, but
I had Captain Rashford the previous week. He was on a double, so I moved it back to Holland this time. So it's not helping me move up the league at all. But
what
was the question?
The question was 1-0 coming away from the San Siro, 1-0. How are you feeling about the second leg, Jack?
Well, I mean, I think we talked about this a lot, and we brought up a comment from somebody that 2 comments from the same person on the show last night is that there was nothing about Milan that made me think that we couldn't come back from 1-0, and there's nothing about Spurs that made me think we could overcome the 1-0 deficit. I mean, we looked pretty poor in the final third. We're still not getting the connection between the forwards. And the defenders were better, but not great. But I mean, I think that at home, if we have a good crowd, a good atmosphere, I give us more than a 50-50 shot at getting back at least the 1 goal and forcing some extra time or winning that outright. The only thing I'll say is I did see that their goalkeeper may be back, as well as Tomori might be back in time for that, which does change their squad considerably for the better.
Well, it'd be nice to have some shots on target to test
the
keeper,
true.
wouldn't it? I mean,
that was one-legged for about 20 minutes. We still couldn't get a shot in.
He was nearly as old as me, their goalkeeper, and I thought he had very little to do. Steve, unfortunately, I don't think we had a proper shot on target, did we?
No, we had a few pops from long range, didn't we? But they didn't work.
Sarr had one.
Yeah.
Emerson had one.
Davis had one that nearly hit me 500 foot up in the gods. But but what I did think, quickly going back to Sarr and Skipp, what I noticed from my very elevated position where you could barely see the players, but they worked really well together. So I think I was reading Ali Gold was saying, they're training together a lot, like as a pair. So you could tell when one broke forward, the other kind of held back to cover, like vice versa. So I think they played off each other very well. And like half the time, our team looks like they haven't played together. So that was actually quite satisfying to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Perisic was poor again, I thought, for me. Just frustrating player, isn't he? I mean, we know we know the talent that he's got and the experience he's got, but just doesn't seem to be happening, does it, Jack?
He's poor. He's been poor enough recently that I've actually I don't know if I've said it out loud till now, but I thought, well, maybe we should put Emerson on the left and Porro on the right, and just take him and put him up in a forward position or as a sub to come off the bench, because he's been that bad that I'm actually thinking that I'd rather have Emerson over there.
I mean, and when you're thinking that, then that's pretty extreme, isn't it? Emerson there. Okay, well, we'll see how the game goes at the return leg. I'll be there. Stevie, you there for that one?
Yes.
And my offspring will be there.
Ah, there you go.
He's one of the Cheese Room Patreon members was kind enough to say he can't make it, so my son will take a ticket, or has an extra ticket. He's going. It's Jimbo, I think, who has an extra ticket.
Okay, yeah, Jimbo's top man. Jimbo, top man. Yeah, he's a lovely guy.
When I went to the Newcastle game, we grabbed a beer with him outside the stadium before that dreadful affair.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that the better. Let's talk about Takeover then. Steve, what do you make of this? I mean, it was quick. It was the best and worst of Twitter today, wasn't it? Takeover bid launched, or they're going to talk to Daniel Levy and Joe Lewis about taking over the club. I think 3.1 billion sterling, 3.8, I think US dollars. Tell us about MSP Sports and what you know.
What I know very little. You told me more than I knew over the chat this afternoon. But I think Twitter was funny, wasn't it? Because at 9 a.m, quite a few people on Twitter were celebrating because Enic were gone, the club was definitely sold, and then about 2 hours later, the club are never going to be sold. And there's just this nice little journey through social media and mainstream media today of a definite sale to there's never going to be a sale. And the thing is, we just don't know. If we link this back to the Google saga, the club were never even talking to Google. So that was on Sky News, that was on BBC, that was in quite a few prestigious, relatively prestigious and reliable news sources, and that was never a thing. So take it with a pinch of salt. The fact that it's coming out of the FT gives it a bit more credibility. But let's see.
That was the first thing I thought. Well, I was just like, okay. And then I saw the source was the Financial Times, and I thought to myself, oh, okay. That probably actually has got some legs behind it.
Yeah, and the other thing that made me think it's got, potentially some legs behind it. There was a bit of detail as well. Whereas the Google thing was just Google
want a sponsor. Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, there might be shirt sponsor, and by the way, they might be buying a club as well. And it's like, this doesn't sound real. Whereas this says there's a little bit of detail behind it, so maybe it is legit.
Thoughts on this, Jack? 3.1 billion. It's not a lot of money, is it, for Spurs? I mean, it's a lot of money for anyone, but for Spurs, I think Chelsea went closer to 4, did it? Or 4.2, was it?
Yeah, there's 4.25. It's kind of one of these numbers. The problem is that I never really did look into the details of that transaction, but I do know that part of that sales price is the debt that was on the club, which was a lot to Abramovich. So I think it was like $1.5 billion was what he put into the club or something like that. And I'm just pulling numbers out. So you have to add that back in. So I think the actual net equity of the business was probably more like 2.5 or 2.75 or something like that. Again, I'm rounding, which means that 3.1 plus the 750 outstanding debt on us is not a bad valuation. But at the same time, they're going to be looking at it to say, okay, we're just entering our best peak phase of revenue generation. And the question is, what is the multiple you think you ought to get? Because your commercial revenue is going up, your sponsorship revenue is going up, your match day revenue is the tops in the league. So they're probably saying we're worth more than Chelsea because these deals aren't done on trophies. So, so I think 3.1 is an opening bid. And I joked around in our chat. I said, that might not get you a Zoom meeting. You probably need to just come up with a little bit higher number just to even get a conversation going, would be my thinking.
I'd agree with that. And I suppose, Steve, the trouble is with Spurs. Well, there's lots of troubles with Spurs, but the trouble with putting a number on Spurs, for me, and my very basic knowledge of finance and football finance, I'm sure to say, is that how do you value it? So there's no stadium naming rights in place. The Sky bar hasn't even been opened. Because that's potentially linked to that. It's
Sky
built
Bridge,
to take
Sky
an
Bar.
NFL. Second, Steve?
Sky Bridge, not Sky Bar.
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't want to offend the Tunnel Club. The naming rights obviously aren't in place, and it's built for the NFL, right? It's built for the NFL. So potentially you could stick a franchise in there. If you stick a franchise in there, then how many more noughts does that put? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? So I think the thing is for Enic, it probably makes very little sense to sell unless the offer is just too good to turn down. But it's interesting that the Americans seem quite interested in it because, according to various reports, including The Athletic, last year Daniel Levy turned down, or Enic turned down, a bid for, I think it was 2.8 billion is what they're sort of throwing around from another unnamed American consortium to buy the club. How do you price it, Steve? And in your opinion, what's it worth?
Oh God! So the pricing of football clubs is very difficult. because revenue multiples don't really work. Profits all over the show. And it's very, it's quite difficult to kind of forecast revenue in a football club because, we get top 4 this season, and next season's revenue, if we get through to the latter stages of Champions League, uplift could be, 80, 90 million, right? Whereas we saw a swing when we went to Conference League, was it 10 million in revenue? So kind of, very small, most businesses you can pretty accurately predict. So I think it's KPMG have got their pricing model. They're kind of one of the experts in this. And they basically use a mixture of like asset values, so like the players and the like the stadium, if you have one, kind of like West Ham, and kind of then put in the expected revenue streams as well, and use some magic, probably proprietary formula, I don't know, to come up with what a price is. What I would think a price would be, it's so difficult to know, so I'm definitely not a valuation expert, but the number that's being bandied about, like Jack said, seems not unreasonable, particularly because it's including a debt, right?
Mm.
So effectively,
and the debt's 1.2. The debt facility is 1.2 billion right now, I believe, total, including outstanding player fees, etc., etc.
Oh, if you're going to include the transfer debt, I think we got a graphic on that. The net debt is 626 million. No, but that includes the gross debt's 852, but I don't know if that includes the.
I think that's just real estate.
I don't know if that includes the transfer debt. The notes that are on the statement, I'm not sure. I'd have to check.
I think it does. And also you've got, like your typical like trade creditors, as well. And then in the accounts we've seen, you've got the warrant, the amount payable up to Enic as well, which they then convert into shares, but in the accounts as a liability.
Yeah, sure. It does indeed. So you think that 3.1's reasonable?
I mean, in my very unprofessional opinion, that seems reasonable. Wouldn't mind it in my back pocket.
Yeah, I think.
Go on, Jack.
I think I think it's an opening bid. The issue that you've brought up is that naming rights aren't there, so that value would have to be added in because the new owners would theoretically be able to sign. You have to have some value to that. And I don't know. I can't tell you what that is, but it's a lot. And then you also factor in this NFL deal. I mean, because it's hard to sell an asset that they might get a franchise, but we all know. I can tell you, sitting here in America, that's going to be the first. That or Mexico will be the first non-American city to get, because Mexico is very big into the NFL right now.
And local.
Yeah, and it's a much easier travel and time zone and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, it'd be more logical to go to Mexico than it would be to London. But they've been fielding games now. For how many years have this now? There's been COVID takes something out, but there's been about. I mean, I think every NFL team has played at the stadium at this point. I'm not an NFL fan, I'll be honest with you, but I think every single team's played there. So it's not that hard. The fans have had at least a taste of what it's like to go over. And I go back and forth all the time. It's not that bad. It's tough on the players, but I'll tell you, it's no worse than the MLS travel schedule. I mean, those boys travel 38,000 miles a year when the average English club does like 4,000. I mean, it's a lot of travel. We're a big place. So I don't see going from New York to Los Angeles being significantly different than going to New York to England. The tough one would be obviously the west coast of the United States going over. So if you add some value for the possibility of a franchise, that number gets really big. But I think 3.1 to 4 is probably reasonable, and Daniel won't take anything under 4. Just a guess.
There's something to cheer us up. 3-1, game over. City top of the league.
Game over.
Lego head losing his head, which is always what we like to see.
So the only other thing I'd say is, you've got to add in the vanity price as well, right?
Right.
The kind of vanity clubs seem to be expiring, but we could have nation state sovereign wealth fund, decide they want to compete with another sovereign wealth fund to have this kind of jewel in their crown. And, although they're kind of changing in their views a little bit, their kind of return on capital or return on investment is just calculated differently. They're a bit less interested in it. So they could come in and pay 4 billion, 5 billion because they're less interested in their returns. Or you could have a more kind of PE type structure, like consortium type, where they're really hot on wanting to get return. And that's where I think Chelsea could come unstuck at some point, because the investors in Chelsea are going to want their money back. Plus loss, right? Whereas, Abramovich didn't.
Yeah.
City's
I wondered about that.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Okay, Steve, do you want to introduce the accounts section? So I've got plenty of slides here, like more slides than you've ever seen in your lifetime, really. Lots and lots of numbers. So we'll go through them quick. But what I think Spurs fans really want to know is sort of what's the financial health of the club? What do we look like in terms of transfers? What have we spent on transfers? Because it's a little bit confusing. There's lots of information out there and misinformation as well.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of just trying to bring it all back to reality in layman's terms.
Absolutely. I think when you say we've got loads of slides, we're not going to show them all before everybody watching just immediately turns off. And a very boring statement. I'm an accountant by trade, but kind of nothing I'm going to say here is in my professional capacity as an accountant. I've been told to say that, so be warned. But I mean, kind of stepping back a bit, I'm sure like most people already know, but I've seen quite a bit of chat on Twitter where some people clearly don't know. So in the UK, unlike Jack in the US, private companies have to prepare accounts. You file them at Companies House. I know quite a few people saying these accounts were late and that was covering something up. Well, just no. So pre-COVID, we normally released in March, which is the latest we can release. For junior ends, you've got 9 months to file. So I think we're just going back to our pre-COVID phase. And also, it could be silly to release relatively sensitive commercial information during a transfer window, right? Because
I think it's fair to say most clubs haven't. I think there's 5 clubs who've filed.
That's correct. Yes, exactly. Most have not.
So we're ahead of the curve, really. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Steve. I interjected.
No, that's fine. So basically, that's all I was going to say on that. And then kind of accounting 101 on football clubs, because it's a little bit different. And I think sometimes people get a little bit confused with like the profits they see and the losses they see. So very, very high level. When you buy a footballer, we do a quick example. We buy a player for 25 million. Well, we buy a player for 20 million. And there's 5 million agent fees. So we record an asset of 25 million, right? So that asset is a bit like a fixed asset, but we call it intangible. So it's an intangible asset, and you do what's called amortize it, which is like depreciation over the contract length.
It's the word of the month.
I know, amortization
is
the word of the month.
Thanks to Chelsea.
I've got people who can't spell amortization telling me what amortization means on Twitter.
Well, Jack can't spell it either because he spells it with a Z. So
I was getting ready to say that.
We're on the same page. So, for example, you've got on your balance sheet this 25 million asset. If it's a 5-year contract, you'd recognise 5 million of expense each year. Now, where people get confused is just say after 4 years, we sell the player for 10 million. Everybody will jump up and down. They've seen we've made a £5 million profit. Because in our accounts, that player, he's worth 5 million. Because he was worth 25, and we've done 5 million a year for 4 years. So he's now worth 5 million. And we sold him for 10. So we've made a profit of 5 million, right? Well, you haven't really, because you bought somebody for 25 and you sold them for 10. So you made a 15 million loss when you look at all the accounting periods. So just kind of word of warning, when you look at profit and loss in financial statements of football clubs, just be a bit careful, because everybody likes to talk about profit for glory and all of this stuff. But, profit isn't necessarily kind of cash generative in this instance. And you asked
how is it different, Steve? How is it different to depreciation?
It's not. It's just it's a different term for a different type of asset. So it's exactly the same concept, and kind of people feel very comfortable with depreciation because it's kind of like a known term. So if you don't understand amortization, think of depreciation. It's the same thing.
There you go. That was a leading question for you. And again, I cut you off mid-flow, which I never want to do to an accountant because you're really interesting. So
the only thing I was going to say, you asked about, what's the financial position of the club? Like, we have got a lot of debt, but it's. And I've said it before. The main part of the debt, the stadium debt, is very, very, very well packaged. It's a low interest rate. It's what 25-year term or something like that. I've seen people say we might pay a bit of it off early. Why would they? Like the opportunity cost of paying that debt off would be negative to the club, so they wouldn't. There's no point. And we've seen a lot of people saying the interest on that debt is 42 million. It's not. It's 24. We'll explain later whether 42 million is in the accounts, but I wouldn't get too concerned about that. So the debt payments are very low. The only thing that not concerns me at all, but the only thing that kind of slightly niggles at me, and I was slightly surprised about, is how high our kind of player liability is. So when you buy a player, almost no football clubs will buy a player for 25 million and pay 25 million day one, right? So they'll kind of pay it off over 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, much like if you buy a car on finance or something like that. That was what, Jack, I think 225 million, I think.
It's 200. The gross amount is 252 million, but we have about 25 million of payment due to us. So the net transfer debt is 225 million. And that is by far and away the tops in the league. I mean, if you want to compare, the next biggest one is Arsenal at 188 million. So we're way out in front on transfer debt.
Yeah. Well, currently at, because
as of the close of the books of June 30th. And not only though, we have also committed a net spend of 779 million since the books closed. So that's going to extend the debt even further into the red. There is there is a little bit of balancing because the cash position of the club increased over 50%. They're sitting on $226 million of cash. So theoretically, they could retire that debt by writing a check. Not that they're going to, but they could.
I mean, do you think there's a couple of things here? Firstly, accounting, Steve. Why would we keep 220 million on the books, cash?
So you got to remember that's obviously point in time, right? So 30 June 22, we had that 220 odd million, cash. Want some to keep liquid, but also, if you look at the accounts, they've got quite a lot of, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, they've got quite a lot of what we call current liabilities. So a current liability is a debt you have to pay off in the next year. I think Jack's looking a number up now, very, very awesomely. So kind of, we've got to keep cash spare to pay that off anyway. Plus, kind of side point to what you asked, I don't know, this is pure guesswork, but the 100 million we drew down from Enic, I'm wondering if the reason we haven't seen that spent kind of through player acquisitions is because potentially it's paying off some of that 220 odd million net debt on players.
Yeah.
That could be a potential. I don't know, but
I suppose that's my question really. Do you think it's part sort of not set aside? I suppose you might, as a personal choice, you might take interest-free credit over 12 months and buy a new watch, say, Steve, and you might buy that watch and you may get 12 months interest-free and then pay it off in full in 12 months. But you've got the money in the bank to pay for it, so you could pay for it. But why would you want to pay for it when you could have it, when you could pay out for it 12 months, keep the money in the bank, attain the interest, etc., etc.? Is that not a similar thing to what the club looked like they could be doing? Especially bearing in mind, I'll quantify that as a bit more. Especially bearing in mind, there's 150 million capital injection to go on top of that. Or
yeah,
is there?
100%. And we'll come on to that in a sec. Like I've seen businesses in the past who, some pretty large PLCs in the UK who have put bonds out because the rate they pay on bonds that they issue is lower than the interest rate they can get in their long-term deposit accounts of banks. So kind of, it's kind of a similar concept, isn't it? If your cost of debt's very low, why would you pay it off? So kind of keep the cash, spend another day. And we also don't know what the club's going to do over summer. And also, like Jack said, we made a load of player acquisitions after 30 June 22. So, we're not going to have 222 million quid in the bank now because we bought a load of players. And yes, payment terms will be deferred, but there'll definitely be some upfront cost.
Yeah. And the other thing is that one of the differences in the accounts, if you look at the operating performance, you're looking at a club that kind of went on a cash flow basis, went negative 9.5 million to positive 101 million over the course of the prior 2 years. So just the cash flow of the company, because the match day revenue, as we all know, is off the charts. So it wasn't from European competitions. It was commercial activity and match day revenue. So they're now generating significantly more cash. It would make sense that the cash balance would have come up in the reporting period. But to your point, Steve, I don't know where that cash is going to go going forward, but they are going to replenish that cash. In other words, you now have a cash generation animal that's, maybe it's 100 million a year. They showed a profit, they showed a loss, but that includes all the other intangible items, the amortization, the depreciation, all that kind of stuff. So they are operating at a very high level vis-a-vis their competitors in the league. I mean, they're generating a lot of cash, so that would make sense that they've got cash. And you said interest rates are way up, so they're actually earning probably something decent on that money right now as well.
Mm-hmm.
Probably earning more money than it's costing in the debt, right? 2.8%, I think.
Yeah, you can invest in U.S. Treasuries at a higher rate than we're spending on the debt.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, look, I'll bring up the profit and loss. There you go. Talk us through that, Steve. Unravel that for us.
Gladly. So I guess starting from top, I'm trying to see my notes as well, which I've done in a different order, which was really stupid, wasn't it? So TV and media is pretty significantly down. The biggest driver of that is really the fact that we weren't in Champions League and we were the year before. So that's hit us, and it drives into. And I know top four isn't a trophy, but getting top four can hopefully help us, touching lots of wood, get a trophy. You can just see the impact that it has on our revenue. Before somebody says, I want trophies more than I want profit, but if profit can drive trophies, then that's all good to me. Broadcasting rebate, I think that's something COVID related. Can't really remember, but 600k, it's barely worth talking about, much like Levy's pay rise. Sorry, Dave.
But I got something for that.
Go on.
No, keep going. We'll come back to
that. Prize money, down again because we performed less well in Europe and we're in lower level competitions. So prize money goes down a lot. Although that was it 2019, we earned, was it 90 or 100 million in prize money from Champions League. So again, you can see when you go further down the line in the Champions League, just how much money you can get in, and an extra 70, 80 million. You take a bit of tax off that. That's another. I was going to say another Richarlison, but that's probably not a good example. Another Ndombele, maybe.
Right.
Jack,
we could use some more Ndombeles. Actually, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean we've only got 8 players out on a European loan. We have one out.
Yeah, don't even start me on that. I can answer this. That's because of the cost of running the stadium, basically. Unless I'm mistaken, gents. I think it's obviously there were no games in 2021, were there? So obviously no staff in the stadium, all furloughed or whatever, or not, as the case may be. No, but I think that would be my answer to that. But Sorry, I interrupted. Jack, carry on, mate.
Oh no, I was just making a joke about players out on loan and Ndombele expenses. That's all. But I will say, Steve, I saw the question. Can we come back on that? But I mean, I did a little. You mentioned Levy's pay rise. There's a coincidental calculation I did, and maybe I was just looking for it. But if you look at the assets that they reported, the assets are up to 1.86 billion, and that's a 7% increase year over year. The net debt, because of the cash flow generation, the net debt decreased 11%. So the assets are up 7. The net debt is down 11. That's 18%, which exactly equals the pay rise that Levy got. I know I'm fishing for it because it's been out there. Why is he the highest paid chairman when he's won one trophy since he's been at the club? Because those two things are true. He's won one trophy and he's the highest paid director in the Premier League. But I don't, there's lots of reasons why, but I just happened to notice that those two numbers kind of coincided. That was nice.
Yeah, nice bit of symmetry there, right?
Yep. So what is in the category of other expenses? Is that where they're picking up the additional operating expenses? Because I know they hired 49 new staff members over the course of the financials and just staffing up for having to actually have game day operations. Is that where that category? I've been looking for an accounting note on that, and I can't exactly find it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'd expect it to be. Kind of, operational costs. I know, and a lot of this, hit kind of this season, but I know, I won't put the exact figure on it, but energy prices have gone up significantly for the club.
Right. Good point.
They've gone up. You could say Jack Clark. So that's a chunk of money gone this year, unfortunately. There's nothing we can do on that.
Yep. But there's that EBITDA number, that earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. You're looking at that 114 number. That's kind of what I was talking about. That's a proxy for operating performance, because that's real money if you think about it. And so that's what I was saying. Well, we did have a loss, and it's real loss, so you have to book that loss. But that's kind of the operating performance is north of 100 million, and I think from what I can tell, that's going to continue year in, year out. And that was the whole point of building the stadium. Whether you like the stadium, or you think it's distraction, whether you think all their activities is poor, it still does generate cash. Now, what they do with that money, we can talk about, but that is a real number.
I mean, yeah, it's an important number, and I think it will get stronger, certainly 2023, when we look back on this year. Because you've got Champions League participation, which, so if you see UEFA prize money there is in there at 10.2 million, that's going to be at least 50. Probably a bit north of that, I would expect, depending on how the second leg goes.
Yep.
So straight away, that puts turnover on the brink of 500 million. And you would expect that matchday revenue will jump a little bit, or match receipts, I should say, will jump a little bit, because obviously Champions League fixtures pack out. Conference League doesn't. Simple as that, really. So even though they're categorizing it as a B game, I think, for Milan, and they did in the group stages, they're still going to make a lot of money on match receipts. So I would estimate we're going to do at least 500 million turnover next year.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the match day, because I tried to do some calculations on this, which is they reported 106 million of match day revenue, excluding merchandise. So not including whatever the shop brings in, which is, something like 700 Sun jerseys alone per match. But over 26 matches, my math says that's 4 million per match day.
Yep.
And so there's been a lot of talk about what they're going to bring in for Beyonce and all that sort of stuff. I just want to say that, when we get 100% of the revenue, we're collecting 4 million per event, but not when we're not collecting the ticket prices. And there's a lot of things that you don't collect on those other. It's still money. They're still making money, but it's not anywhere in this 4 million number. I know we had a lot of conversation about that earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that the concerts and everything else, I mean, they'd be stupid not to have them. They're great in terms of putting the stadium on the map, getting the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium name out there. So
Mm-hmm.
there's value to that straight away.
Absolutely.
But they're not the profit, they're not the cash cow profit contributor that half of Twitter seems to think they have. Oh, Beyonce, that's just paid for a new striker or whatever. Because we get a rental fee and we get, presumably some food and beverage money,
Correct.
but you're not going to get much on top of that, I don't think.
Yeah,
So it's not going to be like hundreds of millions of pounds, tens of millions of pounds. And where would that be recognised, Steve, in this profit P&L account? Would it be? Am I right in saying it'd be in other revenue?
Yeah, it'd be another revenue, and you've both made brilliant points. So you're both sensible. Absolutely. Jackie summed up perfectly. We're not going to be making 4 or 5 million quid per Beyonce concert. We might make 4 or 5 million rental for the 5 events. I'd estimate probably 750 to 1 million quid for the concerts, but per concert rental. And then it depends on who the promoter is and what agreement we've got. But typically you then get a kind of revenue share on the food and beverage. So it could be 80-20 is quite common in the industry. Sometimes I think NFL, we get 100% of proceeds from food and beverage.
Swiss Ramble noted that they think they get 100% of the catering for the NFL games.
So I think it's not the thing about this is when the naming rights come, whenever that is, having people like Beyonce, Lady Gaga, Red Hot Chili Peppers playing will help us generate a little bit more each season in naming rights, as will the NFL, and it just kind of moves the dial a little bit. If let's say all of these events put together get us another, I don't know, 30 million profit a year. It doesn't seem like a lot, but if we could buy another, I was going to say Spence is a bad example, but if we could use that money to punt on, one top class youngster prospect a year, one in 3 of those, 1 in 4,
like the kid we got from Chelsea.
Yeah,
and then Udogie, right? It's 2 Udogies, I think. So it's Udogie and Pape Sarr. So if we're able to invest that, it just gives the club a little bit more freedom. It's not going to allow us to go out and buy Hincapie for 80 million and then Bastoni for another 80 million and whoever else for another 80, 90 million. It's not going to move the dial that much, but it brings us closer to the bigger clubs.
Every little helps, as some retailer apparently says. There's some questions coming in. Do fire your questions in. I'll put them to these 2 chaps. I think I saw one from Adrian. Is commercial, food, drink, corporate, and ticket revenue? So I can have a stab at it. But Steve, go on, break it down for me. Commercial, so sponsorships. Predominantly.
I'd expect. So commercials broken down above it, so sponsorship, merchandising, and other revenue. And I think one thing to note, this is from Swiss Ramble, so we probably should credit him.
Yes.
This chart. Brilliant stuff, by the way. You should like it.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, you can have it. They have an email newsletter now. You can sign up for free, and if you want all 70 pages of this stuff, you can get it from there for free.
Nice. But
I think he's loaded 70 pages on the slideshow, to be honest, John.
37 actually.
But we have to be a bit careful because different people kind of cut the accounts in slightly different ways, and I think the actual financial statements don't quite cut it in the same way as this. But F&B, food and beverage, is probably within other revenue as well at the moment. So I'd be surprised if in 2022 we did 32 million of events, because we would have had the NFL and the AJ fight, and I think that would have been.
That'll be this year.
That was July, was it?
I was just reminiscing, me and you rocking out, Steve.
I was reminiscing the damage done to my terrace.
Yeah, it'll never be the same again. Yeah.
Out.
There we go. There we go. There's the bottom half of it. Carry on. Carry on your descriptive description.
I think, as Jack said, like the depreciation's pretty key. So clearly, most of that's from the stadium, although some of it's clearly going to be on the training ground as well, right? But kind of, that 72 million isn't 72 million of cash out the door every season. And that's why Jack perfectly said that the EBITDA is, a much better measure. And also, we should say most clubs do make an operating loss, so we're not kind of unusual on that. And it doesn't particularly worry me about the financial performance of the club.
Steve, quick question for you. The depreciation on the stadium, 72 million, highest in the league by a long way because we've had a nice shiny new stadium. What is the cost of what is the stadium worth in the books? Do you know?
It'd be
or Jack, either or
950 net, I think. So it was about 1.2 for the build. Although you have to be careful because you've got all the enabling works as well. So kind of, what does the stadium cost? Well, you've got Podium where the hotel is going to be built.
Yeah.
A lot of the resi is going to be built in the sports centre. That could be in at 1.2 million. So
that's the total cost. Yeah.
The actual building, I don't see any breakout for what the actual stadium is versus the greater development area of Tottenham area.
I just wondered, in terms of depreciation, how many years is depreciation over? Is there an accounting standard for that?
So what you have to do is you have to estimate the useful economic life, which is basically how long you think it's going to last, or how long you think it's going to last for you. And just having a look, Spurs say between 2% a year and 20% a year. So between years and 5 years, or between 5 and 50 a bit.
It's a pretty big range. I think I don't know this, and again, this is not I'm not an accountant, but I feel like at least over here, I think for an asset like that, 20 years is maybe kind of standard. But of course, over 20 years, you're gonna have a lot of maintenance and improvements and stuff that has to go into it, and that's one of the things that, like other clubs, Manchester United talks about, they've deferred improvements into that club. You hear their fans complaining about Old Trafford all the time because they haven't been maintaining it and upgrading.
Yeah.
Same thing with Chelsea. They got a lot that have to do to that place to get it up to standards.
And side note, I was at the United away game, and the stadium's grotty. It's really not. It's really not grotty. It's really not a good stadium.
The trouble is, though, Steve, I think when you've been at Spurs, everywhere's grotty in comparison, isn't it? Currently,
Fair.
I'm sure that'll change in the future, but I mean, United is certainly run down. It is run down. Anyway, take us back. We're getting really excited about this. So yeah, exceptional items, and then if you can pick it up from there down, that'd be great.
Who's down?
Down, as in downward.
Oh. You said down.
I thought it was the same thing. I was like, who's Dan?
No. There's no down in here.
Player amortization is what I explained earlier, like the effectively depreciation of players. The player impairment, and King Holdall mentioned that basically that's when you don't think the player's worth much anymore and you impair them down. Sometimes you see players named in accounts. I think a few years ago, United, when they impaired a couple of their players, literally named them in their accounts. And that's going to be humiliating as a player, isn't it? Basically, your board are saying, we think you're shit. Now, the number that really concerns me, and concerns me more than any number in the entire accounts, is a number that I don't think anybody's really picked up on. And it's that profit on player sales.
Yes. Thank you. That's where I want to go. I want to talk about that.
Well, we know what it is, don't we? So,
and there's an individual slide somewhere in that pack that shows the the profit on player sales, profit or loss, over
We
the
have
last
got
5
that,
years.
yeah,
It's deep
yeah.
into that. It's
But-
deep into that deck.
Like, crap, the Swiss Ram will pick up on it.
But that's
Yeah.
due to what you've already described, though, isn't it?
Well,
So-
it's due to that
so-
we're shit at selling players.
The metric,
Yeah.
but like it's where clearly our player acquisitions aren't great at times, and we've got a load of deadwood that we can't shift. Whereas you look at a lot of the other clubs, they're making hundreds of millions on player sales, which then when you churn it back into the club, you can then, caller's gone, obviously needs another gin and tonic. Then you can buy new players and continue to reinvest.
Yep.
And I think whether you're Enic in, Enic out, or wherever you're viewing life in any way, shape, or form, I think we can all agree. Poor decisions have saddled us with players. Well, even the club. The club said it in their statement, didn't they? To the trust, poor decisions around player recruitment, have put us in a bit of a mess.
Yeah, there's no question about that. In fact, I mean, if you look, people are talking a lot about obviously the profligate spending.
There's your slide, Steve, by the way.
That's it.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. There. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it tells the tale, doesn't it? Well, it's not quite as bad that year as I thought, but it tells the tale.
Well, it tells a tale of shocking recruitment. Really, that's ultimately what we're dealing with when you look at this slide. What Manchester City, excuse me, and Chelsea historically are excellent at are basically buying players young and selling them at profit, with lovely little buyback clauses and sell-ons along the way as well. And we just don't do that well, or haven't done that well.
Which also, and Liverpool, hats off to them. This is why, Liverpool's net spend is pretty low, because they sell a few of their players at their peak for absolutely top dollar, and then they go and reinvest. I mean, look at when we were spanking them in the league, and then they went out and bought Van Dijk and God names the keeper. Names eluded me for a second, and then suddenly they were Premier League winners, Champions League winners pretty much overnight.
Yeah, and I think that again the issue is that we don't make much money on player sales. We don't, because again it's been, I think one of the fair criticisms to Levy is his inability to take a deal. And demanding, like I think it was even, I think HG even said yesterday or somewhere, I mean, 12 months left on Eriksen's contract. He's trying to get him for 70 million. Now, to his credit, he got 20 million when he only had 6 months left or something like that. So that was a poor deal on Inter's part from a financial standpoint. But I mean, still, we haven't been able to shift players. We don't sell when they're peak value. And then you couple that with the fact that, while the wage bill has gone up 4%, and it's not bad I think there's a slide on what our wage bill is versus the rest of the league, and outside of obviously City and United, it's pretty competitive. But if you put that with the turnover, we have the lowest wage bill to turnover in the entire Premier League at 46%, which is still, I mean, hell, the new FFP squad cost control, when it's fully implemented, you're gonna be able to spend 70% on wages, which includes agent fees and profit and loss on player sales. We're nowhere close, and there are a lot of teams that are over that 70% right now that they're gonna have to adjust to if they want to play in UEFA competitions starting next year. But the fact that we spend no money on wages has always been my criticism. It's like, it's not that we don't spend money on players. It's not that we spent a ton of money on players. We bought poorly, and then we're not paying wages that are competing with the players, even when the free agent market. So, well, why would I sign for you when I can go up north and get 100,000 more a week? That's where we are losing on the recruitment side. And my point is that if you're generating 100, 150 million in operating profit a year, the fans are going to expect to see some of that showing up on the field in the form of wages, not just gross sale, not just gross purchase prices of players, but actually paying players to stick around. And I know a lot of the way, we do a lot of bonus income and that sort of stuff, so maybe it's not as bad as that. But I just don't see that. I think that's always been one of the fair criticisms. They spend plenty of money, they don't spend it well, and then they don't spend enough of it deep enough in the squad so that the 15th, 16th player coming off your bench is still making 125 a week.
There you go, to illustrate the point perfectly.
Yeah, the total amount is not, in my estimation, really the problem. I mean, it's still a far cry from the top four, clearly. But Arsenal built a fairly good squad for that 212 million, obviously. And so it can be done for that wage. But again, they're still spending way more as percentage of turnover than we are.
United is crazy, when you look at it.
What's that?
Yeah.
United is crazy. I mean, that's just not sustainable.
Oh, well, yeah. we could spend another hour just on their poor decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you say not sustainable, but actually, they're at 66% wages to turnover. So I would
a lot lower.
I would say it is sustainable. The thing is with Manchester United,
I'd agree with you on that.
It's a money making machine, isn't it? In terms of revenue, global brand, number 1 or 2 most supported brand in the world. So that their commercial income's obviously a lot stronger than ours, and various other when they do a tour they're sold out, etc. Because they're playing on that history, aren't they? They're playing on the fact that they under the Sir Alex they won everything for years and years.
Yeah,
made my childhood miserable, but yeah.
Also, they made many people's childhoods absolutely bloody glorious for winning everything. So they've got a huge global following of people kind of our age. You do have disposable income to go buy the shirts, go buy your kind of like dinky little Manchester United coffee mug. And people, advertisers know, sponsors know, if you sponsor United, you're going to have hundreds of millions of eyes on every game.
Yeah. Bearing in mind that wages to turnover, I'm not sure did they get Champions League. I don't know, but generally speaking, they've underperformed, haven't they? So their prize money will not be particularly strong. I think I think they had Champions League that season, but
Everton.
I think you're right about that. Yeah, I mean, that's
there are some clubs that are cooked. You can see it, and they're going to have to do massive realignments with their.
Well, the issue is that 25-26 season, if you want to play in a UEFA competition, then you're going to have to get that number to 70%, or you're going to pay financial penalties that get pretty stiff pretty quickly.
Yeah. And
so that's kind of the issue, is that now you can fix a lot of that by, Newcastle probably is going to get a lot more commercial revenue. And I'd say Manchester City, we're a city on this. So City is actually at 58%. Well, there's obviously charges that a lot of that ratio is understated because of bogus sponsorship numbers and other issues about wages. So obviously there's a lot of games that can get played, but there's a lot of clubs, that are right at that threshold or way above that 70% threshold, which I don't know how that shakes out. I'm not smart enough to know how you can engineer these numbers, but clearly those are not going to work if you want to play in Europe.
I think Manchester City, one of the accusations is they've transferred people off the payroll to a sister company or to one of their other companies.
And the other one is not valuing the sponsorship revenue at fair market value, is saying,
which is
related parties.
Possibly the most obvious thing that I've ever heard.
Natural income isn't far off United's. And
yeah,
we make no judgment here. All we're saying is that seems unusual.
So go on then, Steve, rattle through it, and then if you've got any questions for the guys, stick them in the chat, and I will get through the questions next, because obviously we don't want to be here all night.
And some of us from 3 hours sleep.
Yes, I know.
Go to Champions League game, don't get a 7:30 flight home the next morning.
Yeah, I mean, I I had a wild Valentine's night. My little girl was up for 3 hours in the night, so I know your pain.
I feel you, mate. I feel you. Don't think there's much more to say, really. I mean, the interest point, like what I said before, yeah, it's not all kind of cash interest as such. Part of it is we call it present value of money. So, cool, if I say to you, I'm going to, do you want £10 today or do you want £10 in 5 years' time? You'll take £10 today, right? Because it's more
take it in 5 years.
It's more certain, I could go bankrupt. You could use that £10 to invest in, Tesla shares that you love so much. Kind of, although they're on a downward trend, aren't they? So kind of, what you do is you factor that in. So if I was going to pay you £10 in 5 or 10 years, whatever, you might have that as a £5 liability.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, in today's terms, it's £5. And then each year you'd have like 50p kind of notional interest to build it up to the 10 quid I'll then pay you in 10 years' time. So a large percentage of that is just kind of like notional interest. It's not like cash interest. It's not like an interest rate on a loan. So like, I know a lot of people got excitable about that, but yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. Our debt's very manageable. And then the cash and net debt, Jack kind of covered earlier. Yeah. So kind of, too long didn't listen. Like, yeah, we were loss making, but we're in pretty good financial shape.
I mean, I suppose, and this is the question, are we really loss making? Because if you take depreciation, the stadium is not falling down. They haven't had to fund £72 million worth of new plant equipment this year. So, that is a number that they have to account for because of accounting laws in the UK, right? And maybe worldwide, I don't know. But if you take that off, we're in profit, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the club's in a good position. I think COVID hit us very hard as a club. Have kind of intimated by, what was it, 200 million revenue. We kind of lost, although I don't like saying lost because it's not kind of lost, is it? But 200 million revenue went walking by in COVID, and that's a chunk. That's a chunk of cash. That's 200 million of cash, isn't it? So I think that has probably affected both our ability to buy players, and I think a club to try and remain competitive when they've been buying players. That's probably why we're now, don't want to use the term saddle, but why we have relatively high or very high, probably should say, kind of player debt.
Trying to defer payment.
So, I'm not particularly worried. And I think, as I said earlier, for those who have just joined, that's probably why we had the up to 150 million capital injection.
Yeah. I think that 150 million capital injection is purely around the amount of fees owed on players, to be honest. That's my thought.
I think King Hoddle's got a good question, as it kind of takes us to the high level. What does this tell us about whether to compete? What it tells me, being somewhat of a newbie, to quite frankly, in terms of following this club for a decade, not my whole life, is that there is nothing that the business model of creating the stadium and related commercial activity to create enough revenue to fund into the football side is more than doable. They're making enough money. They don't have to spend Manchester City level wages or United level wages or make acquisitions of players in the Chelsea neighborhood to be competitive, because I think it's the lack of strategic direction that Levy and the board have had with Tottenham for way too long, because we don't seem to stay with one model. We don't seem to stay with one identity. We don't stay with one player recruitment strategy. And we've moved into this win now mentality with the last couple of managers, Nuno not being an example of that is inconsistent with the type of squad that club you've been in the past. And so, and neither one of us worked out. As I pointed out on the show last night, we're going to probably end up with two ex-managers who've won trophies everywhere they've been except Tottenham. And there is I mean, you just have to you have to wonder, okay, what is the common denominator? It's not that you don't have enough good players, but you clearly don't have something right in the club, in the DNA, in the academy system, in the coaching, in the whatever, to get over the hump. We got close a lot. I mean, we got close many, many times over the last 5 years. So it's, maybe a couple breaks here and there, a dodgy penalty on Sissoko, taken out of the mix, and maybe we do have that trophy that kind of relieves some of the pressure. I recognize that, but there does seem to be a serious lack of football execution, because right now there's nothing to stop this club from a financial standpoint from being a regular team holding up a trophy at least every other year. I mean, whether it's League Cup or league, I'm not saying that they should win the Premier League, but winning something, they should be good enough to do that.
Steve?
I'd agree. And all we need, I'm not going to recap what Jack said, but all we need to do is we need to do Liverpool, right? Yeah, we spend more than Liverpool spend net. So we just need to do Liverpool in terms of better player recruitment, better player sales at the right time. So absolutely we can compete under the current model.
I think you're right. I think we can, but I think we haven't, and I think that there's reasons for that. And I would be saying that the chairman is one of the reasons for that, because in terms of player purchases, we've always shied away from making the right decision. In my opinion, where it's an extra 5 million on a player, quibbling about small fees, that holds the club back. I think not having a strategic vision. You look at Liverpool, you raise Liverpool as an example. They got Klopp in, who very quickly you could see was a very good coach, right? A very good coach. He knew the system he wanted to play. He knew the players he needed to get in that system to be successful. We just haven't done that because we either haven't backed the manager with the right players for that, or we've fired him too quickly. Pochettino was finally getting some transfer funding, and then we sacked him when it started going the first sign of trouble, really. There's a lot of people who think he should have been given longer. Personally, I don't, but I can see the argument as to why. Then we hire Mourinho and sack him a few days before the League Cup final, which obviously then leaves Levy open to, you're sacking him because you're a cheapskate and because of his contract, which, by the way, I don't believe. But again,
100% tell you that's not true.
No, and I'm certain it's not true. But equally, he leaves himself open to that belief, and it's a bit of a strange time to sack someone. Let's be honest about it. And now we're at Conte, and is he the right coach for us? When you look at the style we play, it seems football's moved on a little bit. So there's lots of different reasons as to there's lots of reasons as to why we are where we are. But fundamentally, the board are accountable, aren't they?
100%. And I think one thing I would say, and maybe you can say it's taking too long, or maybe it's not enough. I don't know. That's everybody's welcome to their own view. But Levy, the club, Enic, whatever you want to call the kind of decision makers, do seem to be making a bit of a step change. Paratici, has come in, and we touch wood. We seem to have made better player acquisitions more recently. Bentancur, the fact that we're going to miss him so much for the next 6 to 8 months says a lot. Kulusevski, I know he hasn't been great more recently, but the fact that Son also hasn't been great on the opposite wing, how much of that is player talent and going off form, and how much of that is Conte's model? Who knows? Richarlison's a bit of an odd one. So is Bissouma as well for me. So I would have expected Bissouma. I know he's injured now.
But they need to play, Steve. That's the thing. They need to play.
A system that suits them in a position that suits them.
Yeah,
exactly. Like Sarr looks great. And for me, it's an intelligent acquisition, because you're never really going to lose that much money on a player like Sarr.
No.
Good talent, came in cheap. We did a good deal where, like Udogie, where we did the loan back, which I think is, brilliant, because we can see how well Udogie's progressing. Sarr, I didn't watch a lot of him last year. Apparently he didn't progress as much, and kind of stalled a little bit. But he still had first team action week in, week out, which he wouldn't have had sat on our bench or sat in our reserves, and that's incredibly key. So I do think they've made a bit of a change. It's probably too late. Well, it's a bit late. And there's still a question around players like Spence. Why did we buy him when clearly, he wasn't, as Conte says, he was a club acquisition, not a Conte acquisition.
But it's the same old, isn't it? You've got players for now, players for later. As I always say, there's a budget for now, there's a budget for later. There's always going to be that within a successful club at a structure, because we have to keep one eye on what's going to be happening. Much as though it will frustrate the chunks of the fan base and frustrate me to a degree, you're always going to allot part of that transfer budget on people that are going to help you in 3 years' time, not the here and now. That's the way it works,
Agreed, but I think that your reference to Liverpool is the correct one, and I think that's what frustrates me, is that there is talent at this club, but yet we've been chopping and changing managers who play different styles, different systems. When if you're going to do that, buy some now and buy some for later, you need to have a consistent footballing identity, so that when you have to change a manager, what kind of manager you're looking for, and not just going after a name that you think will make you feel good or get a lot of headlines, or I don't know. I'm not trying to ascribe motivation to Daniel, but I wasn't opposed. I was opposed to Mourinho coming in. I wasn't opposed to Conte coming in, but I can see why people were or turned against him, because he doesn't seem to match the identity of the fans of the club and that sort of stuff. So that's what's frustrating. That's up to the chairman. That's back to the chairman.
And the crazy situation is, we've finally got a right wing back. Yeah. It looks like we're going to have a quality young left wing back from next season. Okay, so we're going to have two exciting wing backs. We could have a manager who doesn't play wing backs in 6 months' time. So whose
fault will that be? In my opinion, that's the board's fault. Sorry, there's nowhere else to place that blame. You better hire someone who's got a flexible tactical mandate, who is comfortable playing different systems and adjusting.
I think it's been said before on the cheese room, particularly by HG. Levy is not a football brain. Like, he's not a football. So he goes for the big name coaches who look sexy on paper, who he thinks are going to win him something because they've got a good CV track record. But I certainly think there's been a lack of thought about, okay, what does the long term look like for Tottenham Hotspur? Can we get a Klopp-style coach in, back him in the market, give him 2-3 seasons of backing in the market, and it'll come good, because we know he's got the talent and his philosophy, and that philosophy is cascaded through all levels: the under-23s, the under-18s, the kids, and that's how successful teams do it, right? And that's the frustration for me, that we haven't kicked on under Enic. I did smirk because I saw that in the chat, and no, I'm not going to recount on needing new owners. I think Enic's time is done, and I think we do need to move on. But that is my personal view, and everyone in the cheese room has a personal view.
Yeah, and my personal view is my conservative risk tolerance, I guess, comes in the way. Is like, it's easy to ask for the new owners, but you know what? That's not, just because new owners come in doesn't mean they're going to start putting in, 150, 300, 500 million a year and topping off the accounts and all that sort of stuff, which you probably may not be able to do going forward anyway. So, I mean, because you have to do it from your turnover, not from owner injections, as I understand the new rules. So I always say, hey, they're not great, but you could do so much worse. And they have built a phenomenally good financial model and revenue generator. You can complain about the property acquisitions and where is that money coming from and all that sort of stuff. But part of the deal for building that stadium was a renovation of the area. And so some of that is required spending just to have the stadium that's there to make you £4 million per match. So it's give and take on both sides. So, but I would like to see somebody. What I'd love to see is Daniel get the hell away from the football side of the operations and let somebody like Perisic, if he's around, or whoever his replacement is, take over. Who knows what they're doing?
And I think you've made a great point, Jack, about the kind of redevelopment of the area. And I've seen the club come in for some, I'd say, fairly unfair criticism about that. And particularly around the kind of gentrification of the area, which, for those of you who aren't in London or overseas, we do have a big issue of that. Typically kind of the poorer areas of London, they get kind of gentrified, and the people who live there, grew up there, get moved out because they can no longer afford to live there. And it kind of creates these kind of quasi ghettos. And, I don't agree with that at all. But, the club have actually challenged successfully some of the planning applications to have more social housing, to have more affordable housing, as we now call it. So I don't think a club are looking to gentrify the area. They're looking to invest in the area and to make it better, not necessarily more expensive. And sure, I fully expect, property prices are going to go up because you put in, the academy, which is up and running now and having fantastic results nationally. It's going to encourage people to move to the area, and property prices are going to go up. And there's a supermarket there from a chain who I won't mention in front of caller. And kind of all these facilities are going to raise property prices, sure. But I really do think the club are, at least somewhat. There's levels, right? I'm sure they're interested in their own returns as well, but interested in actually improving the area. And when you look at all the investment they've done around around school, and I think a health centre that's coming, you can really see that playing out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Although, to be fair to Davo, who I do love dearly, we have a love-hate relationship sometimes. He has made some comments, and I think one of them in particular does strike out at me. We can't answer it because it's not disclosed in the accounts. But Davo's asked, how is a property acquisition funded? It's not in the accounts, and to be clear, it doesn't need to be in the accounts. There's, as far as I'm aware, I make no judgment, as I said earlier, but they're audited by Deloitte, top 4 accounting firm. There's nothing in the audit report saying it's missing disclosures or anything like that. So the accounts look proper. But where the properties are, what the properties are, and how they've been funded, and how it all kind of links in, is very difficult to work out. Because the Tottenham structure you've got, if you think about it, in the middle, you've got Tottenham Hotspur Limited and a load of subsidiaries underneath it. So up here for Enic, but then you've also got side entities called Tottenham Hotspur something, rather than Goods Yard Development Limited and all of that, now off to the side. So they're probably funded by Enic rather than the club. Whereas there are some entities owned by the club which potentially are funded by the club to make property acquisitions. So Davo, we don't really know, but it's a very fair question. One we'll never know the answer to, but
and I think, and he cited one particular example of and you made a joke out of it earlier, Owen, about Raz Air, and how we use a private air service that's owned by a related party, and we're paying rent, if we're paying lease payments to this air company. And what I would say is that's actually the way you actually run businesses. I mean, that is always the way you do it. If I have a grocery store, a little shop, and I also happen to own the building, well, I'm going to have a company for the shop, I'm going to have a company for the building, and I'm going to have the company that runs the shop pay rent to the building company, even though I own 100% of both. That's just what you do for accounting and tax and legal reasons. Yeah. So people make a lot of deal about those sorts of things, but that's the way you run large corporations. That's just, as long as you're not paying Razair 5x what it would cost to pay somebody else, that's where the problems come in.
As long as you're not doing something like, say, you own an airline like Qatar Air, for example, and have a vested interest in the success of a football club and sponsor a stadium to the tune of about 5 times the market value. That would be that would probably be a bit dodgy, but yeah. Look, gents,
that's just hypothetical.
It's just hypothetical.
Yeah.
It's been great to have you on. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments. We'll get back to you via the medium of YouTube socials.
Please smash the like button.
Do smash that like button. It does help. Steve, thanks for joining us. I know you're not jet lagged, but very tired.
I'm very tired.
You know what my life's like now. Every day it's like that. And then you keep me moaning. Jack, pleasure as ever. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it very much.
And until next time, or until someone else puts a bid in totaling 4.5. I saw a funny thing today. Someone's going to put a bid in for Spurs, but they're going to pay in installments over 50 years and stick a bag of M&Ms on top, just like we do our transfer business. So there you go. So until that happens, until Friday night, where am I in the week? Friday night, 9 p.m. Be there, be square. Hit the like button and come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.